In this video, I'm going to show you how you can make an effect like that. I put a ballerina into a snow globe inside a bedroom, and we're gonna go through the whole process, how I recorded her, how to key her, especially keying a green screen character who is moving that fast is special. There is a few things you have to keep in mind to do that, and I'm gonna walk you through this whole thing. And in the end, I'm also gonna break down my scene just in case you want to make a snow globe scene yourself. We're gonna be using two softwares today. We're gonna start with After Effects, where I'm gonna do my first key. You can also use DaVinci or Premiere or even Blender itself, but I'm gonna do that in After Effects. And later on, we're gonna move on to Blender so you can see how I use this green screen character in a 3D environment. So let's get started. I already imported my green screen video into my After Effects composition, and you can see her dancing around, and shooting all that was a little bit tricky because Jasemin here, which is a great dancer, you should definitely check her out. Her social media is in the description. She needs space to dance, and my green screen is very tight, and I had moments like just like right here where she broke the green screen, and for moments like that I would need to cut her out manually, so I can't just do the chroma key effect. So I told her over and over, stay in your lane, don't move too far this way, too far that way. So that is the first difficulty. And of course she needs to stay away from the green screen, because the moment she steps too close you can see the shadows popping up on the green screen. So yes, if you do those things at home, you have a lot of more limitations as opposed to shooting in a huge green screen where you have all the room you need. So keep that in mind. It's still possible, but you have to work around your own limitations. The other thing to keep in mind is when you shoot a dancing character or a moving character, you want to increase the shutter speed of your camera. A quick breakdown what a shutter speed is. Shutter speed is on the bottom left usually on your camera screen. It says 1/50th or 1/48 or 1/69. That's the shutter speed. And when you have a moving character, you're gonna have a lot of motion blur. What is motion blur? It's this thing here. You can see she's bringing her foot up and it is very blurry, correct? And in order to have it not blurry, which is very helpful when you try to key out the green screen behind her, you need to increase the shutter speed. So instead of 1/50th, you want to shoot 1/100th. What I did, but what I should have done is shooting 1/200th, because then this would have been completely sharp, and that's what I actually want, because that's gonna make the key way cleaner and way better. And then once the key is done, which I'm going to show you by the end of this segment of this video, you can add motion blur on top of that. It's not real motion blur, it's CG motion blur, but it really works just fine. So that's the way I recommend you doing that. The other way is just forget what I just said, record with the shutter speed you actually would like to shoot it, like 1/50th if you want the motion blur, and then deal with the key like this part. Just try to deal it the proper way, which is gonna make the key harder. Either way, it's time to key her out, and there is different methods to do that. But for me personally, I realize, especially if you don't have a perfectly lit green screen like I do, I have lots of shadows here, shadowy areas, and if you have not a great green screen just like myself, then I recommend you doing that method. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have this video 2 times on top of each other, okay? Playing at the same time. Then I'm gonna remove the green screen with a very harsh contrast from the top layer and having a black and white mask. Black being everything what I want to delete, and white everything what I want to keep. And so I'm gonna have her, everything what belongs to her being completely white, and the background, everything what is green is going to be completely black. Now, how do we do this? Let's go. I'm about to show you. So I'm gonna, with Control D, I'm gonna duplicate my layer. I have it 2 times on top of each other. I'm just gonna name it also, just to keep it simple. So right click, name, rename, and let's call this color, and let's call this key. So let's check off the eye on the color layer. We don't need that right now, so I'm just gonna work on the key layer right now. So right click, effect, keying, and key light 1.2. Nothing happened yet, but now when I use this screen color picker and pick whatever green is close to her, now it's removed the green completely. When you zoom closer here, you can see that there's some gray areas, even like on the blacks, like you can see it over here. It's not perfectly black, and we really need this to be perfectly black and those edges to be sharp and clean. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of using the actual key on the final result, I'm going to switch this to screen matte. Now I can actually see better what is black and what is white. Her white is almost perfectly great. I have a few transparency layers, a transparency grays on her, what is this thing called? I forgot. 2-2? Is that what it is? I don't know. Anyways, I see some kind of gray, and everything what is gray is basically transparent, which is fine, but now we're gonna try to make everything what is black completely black. So I'm gonna go to the screen matte settings and increase the black until all the blacks, I'm looking at this area right now, are completely blacked out. Sweet. Now I'm gonna go on the whites, even though I don't think it's necessary. I see some gray areas here, so until those disappear, I'm gonna decrease the white. And all I'm doing right now is just increase the contrast of my video. So now I have this, which is also a very cool effect which I could use. Very nice silhouette. And that's basically all I have to do. We're gonna need to do some fixing, but usually while we are at those settings here, I like to decrease the shrink growth a little bit, just a few pixels, just increase the softness a little bit, and that's basically all I do. But always depends on your shot. You might want to play with those settings a little more. Very similar to what shrink and grow does. You can see when I go into the negative value, it takes away from her mask. When I go in positive value, it gives her more mask. So usually what I do is just go on negative 0.5%, and that usually does the trick. And again, I increase the softness just to make her edge a little softer, because I don't want it to be completely sharp. I just want it to be a little soft. Don't go overboard, because when you go overboard, you can see in the final result what's going to happen. Just it's too soft, it doesn't look right. When it's too sharp, it also doesn't look right. So I just a little bit. There we go. Now again, I told you we're not going to use this as the final result. If you have a good green screen, you could, but I'm not. Screen matte. I'm going to go back here. Now we're going to turn the below layer on again. Now I'm going to use this mask, this black and white mask. I'm going to use this mask information to remove the color. I'm going to use this mask information to cut out everything what is black and keep everything what is white on the below layer. Now where I'm going to do that, I'm going to go to the track matte options. If you don't have that, you can switch between modes here, and I have it right here. Now under track matte, you can either use this pick whip tool and just drag from this one to the upper one. That usually does the trick. Or you can just go under no track matte and find your color one, does the same thing. And now it uses this key, which is automatically turned off right now, using that information to cut out the green screen. And that is perfect. Now the only issues I have right now is I obviously have like everything around my green screen. It's still there because it obviously didn't cut it out, but there is a very simple solution. And I get that question asked more than I thought I would. It's like, how do I get all the rest out of here, and how does that work? And I just go on my below layer, on the color layer, take my pen tool, and I draw a garbage mask around my subject. And everything what is in the green screen, this is going to be inside the garbage matte. And now you can see everything else disappeared. Okay, 2 more things you want to do. First of all, there's gonna be spill on her. Spill meaning green color from the green screen spilling onto her skin. You might not see it in here right now because this is shot in S-Log, which is a very raw, flat format where you don't see colors very well. But if I color grade that, you can see that there's going to be a lot of spill on it. So we're just going to add on this layer a color effect. And if you shoot on S-Log, you can do that too. So I'm just going to go under color correction, lumetri color, adding just a lot, which also helps me to see how much green is actually still in there. You can see all those edges, they're green because it's the green spill I was just talking about. And here also the motion blur gives us a little green. All these edges are green, and we might need to work on this mask a little more. But my first thing is what I'm going to try. I'm going to go on right click, effect, keying, and advanced spill suppressor. And a spill suppressor, what it does is everything what is green, it just reverses it into the opposite color. So everything what was green before, it's not green anymore. You probably want also the spill suppressor to be on top of your color grade, and that already looks so much better. You see the difference, especially like down here. Yeah, this is great. Now, if you want to see the actual transparent background and not a black background, which can help you to identify problems in the key, then you can turn the background off with the transparency grid down here. Now the next move is, I told you about that, is we need to add motion blur because I removed it basically artificially by increasing the shutter speed, and I want to add more motion blur in it, especially in the fast moving moments. So let's go to this moment so we can see how much motion blur we have. So I'm gonna make a new layer, a adjustment layer, new, go on layer, new, and adjustment layer, and here I'm just gonna find an effect called pixel motion blur. It's under effect, time, pixel motion blur. Don't confuse that with force motion blur. It's a very similar effect but used in different circumstances. In that one we need pixel motion blur. Now you can already see it did its magic. You can see when I turn it on and off that it adds motion blur. And here under shutter angle I could adjust those things. After Effects is using a shutter angle. Cameras usually, or at least my camera, is using a shutter speed. It is basically the same thing. Other film cameras, they use also a shutter angle, so depending on your camera you can adjust that. But 180 degrees is basically 1/50th of the shutter speed. Okay, so that's basically what we want, and that's basically it. So now we need to bring her into our Blender scene. And how do we do this? It's very simple. What we need to do is render this out with a transparent background and then bring it as a plane into Blender, and now I'm going to show you how to do that. Go on Composition, pre-render, find where you want to render it, give it a name, Jasemin, keyed out, save. Now under settings, you need to create your own settings. So what you need to do is go on those output module settings, and under format you can go on QuickTime. You can also render it as an image sequence, that works too, but I'll do QuickTime because it renders faster. And then make sure that it renders in Apple ProRes 4444, because what that stands for, that you also can render with transparency. Okay, so under the settings, under the video codec, you have to go 4444, and now instead of just the channels RGB, you need RGB and alpha. Alpha stands for transparency, because we don't want like a black background or a white background or this weird background. We want an alpha, so there is no background. If I just rendered out in RGB, I would get her with a black background, and that would defeat the purpose. So make sure RGB and A. Hit OK, and then hit render. Now that the render is finished, we can go inside of Blender, and I built my scene already. You can take a look what it looks like right now. I'm gonna go deeper into it, what I actually did here, but I built my scene first, and that's basically what it looks like. It's like this bedroom here, and when I zoom in into the snow globe, You can see there's this mountain, and then we have the actual location where she's going to be dancing. So now with shift and right click, I can put my 3D marker down here, so I know when I import my video it's going to be just here. So in older Blender versions, the way you did it was using images as planes, but they did change the name. So what you do is shift A, and then you go on image, and there is no images as planes anymore. It's called mesh plane. Now you can import your green screen key you were using. Here it is, and you can see there she is, dancer. In the solid view, you're not gonna see her, but in Eevee or in Cycles, you're gonna see what she actually looks like. So in Cycles, you obviously can see a little better what the end result is gonna be, but since it's a very big scene, I'm just gonna start working on that in Eevee, so we're just a little faster. So what I usually do is I have a 3D model of a person in my scenes as a size reference. So I know exactly what a person, how tall and how wide he or she would be. So when I turn him on, I haven't turned off in the render, but if I turn him on, I can see how big he is. So now I know I can scale up my green screen character until he or she is the same size, and now I can bring her up that she's just touching the ground. Now she's a little too big because he's taller than her. So scale it back down with S, by the way. With G I can bring her back down into the ground until they look the same size. And once I'm done with that, I can turn him back off. I don't need him anymore. Now I can color grade her a little that she fits more into the scene. And what I like to do is I'm here in my shader editor. If you don't know how to turn this on, you can go on this little icon and open up the shader editor. If you need another window, you can right click in between and split it like a vertical split and open one here or not, depending on your area. If you don't need one anymore, then you can just join areas and then close one up. Anyways, this is my video footage. If I mute this, it's just going to be completely black. This is the principal BSDF. This is the actual video. If I mute this, it's also gone. So I need those two. And the way this is automatically set up is that the color goes into the base color. The alpha, very important, goes into the alpha. If that was not connected, I would just have a black background. So let's connect it back up, and then we can work on this. Now we can see that she's just too dark. She's like too saturated, and I can work on those things separately. So the first thing I do is I usually crank up the roughness, because I don't want her to be reflective almost at all. Like having a little bit of reflection of the snow on her wouldn't be too bad, but not too much. So I usually crank this number up. Metallic, also, you don't want her to be reflective. I keep this down. Just like specular, I keep those values down. That's usually all I do. Now I'm gonna make a new node to work on her colors a little more in detail. So I'm gonna go on Shift A, and let's go with the hue and saturation node. This is usually a good start. I'm gonna keep this one up here. Now I can just increase her value until she's like brighter and feels like, okay, she actually belongs into the scene. Now I can see that she's way too saturated. The colors on her are way too saturated for the environment, so I just decrease the saturation on the same node until I feel like, okay, she does belong in there. Another thing you can do is just play with the hue and saturation if you want to keep her colors more natural, because I did light her with a pink light from the top, because in the final scene there is a pink light, but this doesn't affect my stones and my rocks and my mountains almost at all. So I just decrease it artificially and also decrease the saturation until I feel like she belongs in the scene. Now her blacks and those blacks, they're not aligned, so I can play with the contrast a little. So I'm gonna make another node, RGB curves node, bring this right before this node, and now I can just work on her shadows separately. So I'm just going to bring her shadows up just slightly to align her with the stones, with the shadowy parts of the stones, because I want this to be almost the same. Amazing. Now when I go into cycles, I can see what it actually would look like, and you can see sometimes it doesn't align at all with your final render. So of course you have to dial back and make sure that in cycle it actually looks right. Okay, one more thing. You can see how she is, or the layer in general is just like facing forward, but it's not facing the camera. And usually I recommend, for like most cases, that your video should always be facing the camera, because you don't want like funny angles like this. That doesn't look right. Okay, so what you want is that this always gonna face your camera. So let's find our camera, which is right here. This is the camera. So we want to put a constraint track from this video onto the camera. The way we're gonna do that is we're gonna go on our constraints, have your layer, your green screen layer selected, add a constraint, and what we want is tracking track 2. Now under the object, use the eyedropper and select your camera. You can see it just jumped up, it's facing our camera. It also flipped 180 degrees, but we can easily fix that by, instead of using -Z, we're gonna use +Z, and it flipped to the normal direction. So wherever the camera is going, our 2D image is always going to be facing our camera. And don't worry that it doesn't look right in Eevee, as long as it looks right in your cycles render or wherever you're rendering in, as long as that looks right, you're good. And that's basically all you need to know about the green screen, implementing green screen into your 3D Blender scene. And now I can show you a little how I actually made my environment. And I also tried something like that for the first time, so I'm sure I made many mistakes. So I started with the big mountain here. You can see it right here. This is my beginning. I downloaded this mountain from Blender Kit, so I didn't make it myself. And then inside this mountain I just added a few rocks, and I changed the rock texture. Just with the hue and saturation node, I just made the rocks a little brighter because I want them to be snowy. This is what they looked like before. With my node, they looked a little more snowy, and all I did is just increase the value, and that's basically all I did to them. And you know, I just scattered them all around my 3D scene, so it looks a little more dynamic. Now on top of that, I have the smoke, I have a VDB of a cloud. You can download those VDBs on the Embergen website, so it's basically just a VDB of a cloud. I just put that on top of everything, so it looks a little more awesome. And inside of this VDB, I also have a particle simulation of snow particles falling from the sky, which also looks very cool. Like in a later moment when the camera zooms out and we can see the whole snow globe, and we can see all those reflections here. That looks very cool with the snow. I did that on top of that. Then of course we can see the snow globe here. So everything, all that, when it comes to scale, is gigantic. It's like very big, because the only thing really to scale is the mountain. The mountains and the rocks is the only thing really to scale. Everything else is just blown out and huge, which also gave me a hard time rendering that. To render this scene took me like 3 days, which is a very long time for my machine. Anyway, so this is like the snow globe. It's just a sphere. I also downloaded that from Blender Kit, and then I set up this little bedroom scene. I just made a regular room. I made my own window because I wanted, through this window, I wanted God rays to come in, so I have a little bit of complexity in the shadows. So that also means that I have a sunlight coming into the room, which also was one light source. So altogether I have one light source is the sun, another light source is here, and I believe I had another light source, yeah, right here, just for like a little fill. And that's basically the whole scene. So once I rendered this all out of Blender, which again took around 3 days, I brought it back into After Effects to do some final compositing, which you can see right here. In this final compositing, I did more things that I actually planned on doing, but I just wanted to enhance the scene a little. So it starts with my first layer here. This is what it looked like when it came fresh out of Blender. So the first thing I did to that is I added snow particles flying all over, just adding a little bit of snow. It's just a snow video basically, just for the foreground to have a little more of that. On top of that, I also made in After Effects extra snow particles when she kicks up the foot. you can see snow is being generated where her foot is, and I just made it with a particle system inside of After Effects just to add a little bit of extra detail. Most people that didn't even notice that, but I did it. And then when we go back to the main comp, on top of this video, I added another video just as a glow to make this look a little more fantastical. The way I did that is I just copy pasted the same layer on top of each other, put a Gaussian blur on it on around 50, depending on your scene might be different, and I set this to soft light. It's a nice way to add a little dream effect to it. On top of that, I also added like a little glow, which is barely visible. For some moments it's more visible, others less. On top of that, a color grade, because I wanted the colors to look a little different. On top of that, I added pale cyan color from the bottom and a pink from the top right. And of course, I can't live without it, an optical flare on top of that, which is also not very visible, but it's mostly just this is basically what it looks like. It's mostly just a lens dirt, a flare through the entire thing. Again, you can't really see it, and I put that on screen, of course. And on top of that, I added film grain to put this whole scene together. So that is before the After Effects compositing, and that is after. And if you put all this together, watch the whole thing, this is what it looks like. So if you have any questions about that scene, please let me know in the comments below, and see you in the next video. Doo-doo-doo.